Friends, I've been living in the UK for 2 years. My British clock is telling me we are very late, 3 minutes late, so please have a seat. Let's take a seat, please. فيش كامبل ايش هذا الجست هاوس هي مضيعه سيلفر بريسلت اوكي
جولد بريسلت
اوكي
بتسوي على الانرجي تاعتها فضروري
okay friends someone lost an important bracelet to track allergy, silver and gold. Anyone who finds a bracelet, please bring it to us, to one of the staff members. Thank you. A bracelet made of silver and gold, but it's important for allergy, for tracking allergy. Thank you. So we'll be starting with our second morning session. Christian witness in context of oppression. We'll have with us Reverend Dr. May Cannon, Reverend Dr. Jack Sara.
Reverend Dr. May Ellis Cannon is the Executive Director of Churches for Middle East Peace and an ordained pastor in the Evangelical Covenant Church. Cannon holds a Master of Divinity and an MBA from North Park University and an MA in Bioethics from Trinity International University. She received her first doctorate of 2 in American history with a minor in Middle Eastern Studies at the University of California, Davis, focusing on the history of the American Protestant Church in Israel and Palestine. She is the author of several books, including the award-winning Social Justice Handbook, Small Steps for a Better World. Together, let's all welcome Reverend Dr. May Ellis Cannon.
Hello. I have been coming to Palestine for a long time, and I had the privilege of living in Jerusalem in 2010, 2011, but I consider Beit Zahor my home. And this morning I got so lost. I spent 45 minutes in the hills of Bethlehem, Beit Zahor, and I kept running into people, and my Arabic is I learned it on the streets of Jerusalem, so I can cuss and order wine, which didn't do me much good in finding Bethlehem Bible College. So I kept just saying, Wayne Kanisa, and that's why it took 45 minutes. So if I had trepidation about the words I was going to share with you this morning, that didn't help center my spirit much. I'm grateful for the gift of being together, and it is a gift. One of the things that struck me, particularly during the time of Lent, I don't know about you, but over the past 8 months or so, when I experience joy, I feel guilty. I got one nod. Yeah. And the passage that got me through, that I think for me answers the question of what does it mean to be a Christian witness in the midst of oppression is Romans chapter 12. And it says, abhor what is evil and cling to what is good. And in some ways, I think it's easier to abhor what is evil because all I feel is angry. I keep speaking to churches, and I just start yelling. And my husband says, Mace, I'm doing this at home too, right? And he says, stop yelling at me. And I say, I'm not yelling at you, I'm just yelling. I'm so angry. But underneath that anger, my heart is broken. And so, I've given more than 100 talks, since October. I'm not nervous about talking. And I was telling Jack, I've rewritten this talk 10 times. And I don't have any wisdom. And I know that broken hearts is not enough. One of the prayers, I saw that Steve Haas is here. I think that he shared this prayer in 2010 or 2012 at Christ at the Checkpoint. But one of the prayers we often pray at World Vision is, break my heart for the things that break the heart of God. The founder of World Vision used to pray that prayer. And I don't know about you, but if you really pray that prayer, that takes a lot of courage. Because my heart is not big enough. To hear the things that we hear each and every day, and to see the things that we see each and every day, and that the world is not abhorred. That on October 7th, there was a government that said, turn off the water, the gas, and the food, and the electricity of 2.3 million people, and that the entire world was not in an uproar. My heart is not big enough to be that broken. And so the other prayer I've been praying is not only break my heart for the things that break the heart of God, but it's also, God, expand my heart. I have deep gratitude for Bethlehem Bible College. On my own journey, you heard about my master's degrees and my doctorates. And when I first came here in 2009, I thought I knew a thing or two about the world. My first book was coming out. I was getting a PhD. My former husband, the first one was a jerk. The second one's good. My first husband used to always tease and say, master of all trades and doctorate of none. So I went and got 2 doctorates. I thought I knew a thing or two about the world. And when I crossed the Allenby Bridge and was standing in the West Bank, the Israeli Border Patrol said, are you going to the West Bank? And I said, no. What an idiot. And I'm an educated American. And what ignorance, right? And I had this book coming out. It was about 3 weeks before the book was to go to print. I had this book coming out about global justice issues. I did not name it Social Justice Handbook, the audacity. You introduce yourself and you say, I wrote the book on social justice. The handbook, nonetheless. I'm hearing I have not been with you the last couple of days, but I've been watching online, and I'm hearing, all of the words about white supremacy and colonialism. And here I stand before you as a white American woman, incredibly privileged, who wrote the book, the Social Justice Handbook, right? That's the exclamation mark on the end of that sentence. So I had this book coming out about global justice issues, and I thought I knew a thing or two about the world. And I came here to see Israel, and I came here to meet Jesus. And I did both of those things, but I also had a Damascus Road experience. I started to see signs that said Free Palestine, and the only Palestine I knew was this map in the back of my Bible. And I started to have this, what's that word? I don't know names. Anybody who travels with me knows this. I know no names. I mean, I forget my husband's name. I forget my own name. So when I forget yours, don't be offended. And I don't know acronyms. See, I even forgot what I was just saying. So, incongruity, what's the word for like when you have this like experience, you know? Thank you, that's the word. See, we're gonna preach together, like, because I don't have it in me. So I had this, that's the word, thank you. I had this cognitive dissonance. And I had this book coming out about social justice, and I came here to Bethlehem Bible College, and I heard Bashara Awad tell the story of the Nakba and the Palestinian people, and I just began to weep. I just wept the whole time he was talking. And if you come to my office in Washington, D.C., you'll see this picture. And there's this picture of me with tears in my eyes, and it was the moment. It was my Damascus Road experience where scales fell from my eyes. And I went to InterVarsity Press and I said, I cannot have a book coming out about global justice issues that does not mention Palestine. And they said, May, your book is 200 pages and it has an index and we can't, you'd have to redo the entire book. It was like literally going to print. They said, we can't add Palestine. And I said, well, it can't go to print. So this went on and on and on. And so there's one line in Social Justice Handbook about Palestine, and it's in the section about South Africa, about apartheid. And it says, Jimmy Carter says, what's happening in Palestine. It uses the title of his book, Peace Not Apartheid. That's the only mention in Social Justice Handbook about what's happening here. My point is, what does it mean to be a witness? It means to allow our hearts to be broken and for God to give us eyes to see. Witness is about eyes to see the oppression that is before us, but not only that, the role that we play in it. The hard part about these prayers and the hard part about this message is that we as human beings can't face the reality of our own sin and our own contribution. Do you remember when Moses was on Mount Sinai? He could not see the face of God. It was too much for him. The passage in Exodus 33 tells us that in our own human frailty, we do not have the capacity on our own, for the glory of God is too much to handle. We both don't have the capacity to see the goodness of God, but also the truth about who we are in the midst of this story. And so the Lord gave Moses a greater revelation of his visible glory, which is the outward manifestation of God's character and nature. And so you'll recall that God said he would turn his back and allow Moses to walk by. God only reveals to us as much as we can handle. This, if you use Romans chapter 12, I'm not going to go through the whole passage, but it talks about by the grace that God gives us, right? And so if we pray for God's grace, guess what? It's not going to get easier. It's going to get harder, I promise you. This is the hardest work I have ever done. And I'm not saying that because I feel sorry for myself. I'm saying that because I don't have the courage to do it. I'm saying that because we have to admit the hatred within our own hearts. And friends, we have more hatred within us than we even know. And if we really want to be peacemakers and witness the oppression of the Palestinian people, we have to come to terms with that reality. And it is hard. It is so hard. It is so much easier to be angry. How many of you know the Enneagram? If you don't know it, I'm sorry, look it up. I'm an 8. I'm a fighter. We fight everything. Plus I'm Irish, so I'm an Irish 8 on the Enneagram. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Fighter, not a lover. Oh, I was speaking to this where's Jonathan Katab? I don't know if he's in the room. Jonathan and I, the church in New York, that we were speaking to this church, totally pro-Israel. These men shook my hand, and I thought my hand was going to break. And I started out talking to them about being a fighter and being Irish, and we talked together to this church about Palestine. There was a man that was going to leave the church just before we were going to come, before we even spoke. And we talked about God's ways not being our ways. And by the time we left, he said, maybe I was wrong about the story of Israel and Palestine. Fighting and being angry is a human way to deal with this issue. Do you know those verses that talk about in your anger, do not sin? I would much rather stay angry. It actually feels really good to yell sometimes. Do you know how much I was really going to cuss Jack Sarah? I just restrained myself. Do you know how good it feels to cuss right now? And I always use the justification that Jesus cursed the damn fig tree, because he did. It feels so much better to be angry. And listen to me, please. I am not saying that anger is not justified. We should be angry. It doesn't say don't be angry. We should be angry. We should be more angry than we are. Why is the world not freaking ass angry? Why is the church okay being silent? We have been speaking to as many churches as we can speak to, saying, don't be scared, don't put your head down, have courage, please, please, please be angry. Children are dying, and the ones who aren't dying are being starved, so much so that they are going to have mental disabilities for the rest of their lives. We should be more angry than we are. But in your anger, do not sin. I'm going to tell you a story. I have permission to share this story. Is Shireen in the room? Shireen, hello. Oh, right in front of me. Habibti. Miss May is gone. Okay. Little Maryame. If you see a little Palestinian girl running around with the name tag May Cannon, that's Shireen's. I was sitting in January at Shireen's kitchen table, and I love her children like my own. And Palestinian mothers, how many Palestinian mothers do we have in the room? You are the heroes. You are the heroes of this conflict, raising your children to love and not hate. And Shireen has been doing that with her kids. And little May is very industrious, so she asks Shireen to buy her candy from the store, and so lots of candy. And Shireen says, well, you can't eat all this candy. What do you want this candy for? So May takes the candy to school and sells it for 3 or 4 times more than the candy costs. Now, lest you think she's just an entrepreneur and being selfish, guess what she's using the money for? She's using it for children in Gaza. And we're sitting at the kitchen table and we're talking about this. And we're talking about this beautiful little girl who they call May. And she says, I want the bombing to stop. I want the bombing to stop. And then she says, but I don't want the bombing of Israel to stop. I want them to keep bombing Israel. And she didn't say that because she's hateful. She didn't say that because she's Palestinian and she's a terrorist. She said that because she's a little girl who lost 2 aunts, or an aunt and an uncle and another aunt that's been injured. She said that because she's in pain. This little girl. So I'm sitting at home a few months later, and I'm visiting a family member, or family members visiting. Anybody here from Texas? I always have to check before I tell stories about different states. This family member from Texas, a fundamentalist Christian. And, I knew, you kind of know where the story's going to go, right? Like, you know how it's going to go. And this story's actually not about his sin. It's about my own. And we're talking about these issues, and we're talking about what's happening, and he's asking all these questions, and he's not really listening. And I tell this story about Maria. And I tell this story thinking that he will have empathy for what these children are going through. That children in Gaza are asking, what's America going to give us today? Is it bread or is it bombs? Right? That our hearts should be broken for these children. And you know what he says to me after I tell him this story? He says, that proves my point. Look, Palestinians are full of hate. I wanted to kill that man. I had so much hatred in my heart. In my home, he said that about someone I love, who's so good. That's the message he got out of that story. And friends, if we want to be a witness to the oppression here, we have to deal with that hatred that is within us. And if we want to be really honest when we say break our hearts about the things that break the heart of God, our hearts should also be broken about what happened on October 7th. It was an atrocity against God. Now, I believe there's a microcosm and a macro, a micro way to look at this and a macro issue. I agree 100%. I heard Shireen say the other night, this did not begin on October 7th. I agree. The context is important, 100%. But that Israeli mother or that international mother who lost a child that day, our hearts should be broken for them as well. And if we want to have Christian witness in the midst of our oppression, it does not minimize our calling for justice for Palestinians by speaking out against atrocities against Israelis. It actually strengthens our cause. That is the Christian message on the cross. The task of a leader is to carry the pain of your people. Now, do I know that October 7th brought attention to the struggle of the Palestinian people? Yes. And is there international law that allows for violent resistance against oppression if it's not against civilians? My understanding of international law, which is limited, but my understanding is that is a legitimate point of engagement, right? But as Christians, where would Jesus be? What does Jesus call us to? If you look at Romans 12, he talks about sacrifice. He talks about not only loving your friend, but loving your enemy. What does it mean? I am so sorry for the pain and suffering of the Palestinian people. And I am so sorry to bring this message because I promise you I really don't want to be bringing it. But friends, if our Christian witness is not different than a worldly witness, what kind of message do we have that points to Jesus? I've preached nothing that's in my notes. When you go to Romans chapter 12, it says, abhor what is evil. And boy, wouldn't it be nice if it was all evil on one side and all good on the other. And I know we in America really like for it to be that way. But it is not a binary. There is evil everywhere. And death and murder and killing and violence is evil against the image of God. Every human being is made in Imago Dei, the image of God. And we need to abhor what is evil. And not only that, we also need to cling to what is good. And it is good for us to be together. And it's good that when we see one another and it brings us joy, even in the midst of such atrocities and as we're working to prevent further genocide, and as this is the hardest work we're ever going to be called to do in so many ways, because friends, this is not about Palestine. This is about the witness of the church in the history of the world. This is not about the liberation of Palestine only, yes, but it's about the liberation of the gospel. This is about, is the good news of the gospel true? And where is the church in this moment? Where is the church? And is the church calling us to more, to entering into that pain, to a sacrificial giving that costs so much? Why is it that secular college students who've never even been here are doing more than the church is doing? They're willing to give up their entire futures, their degrees, their futures. Why are they willing to sacrifice more than the body of Christ? What have we lost? Church, what have we lost? We have to return to Jesus, not for the liberation of the Palestinian people, but for our own liberation, for the liberation of our souls. And the good news of the gospel is this, that it's for the liberation of all people who choose to follow. And it's about physical oppression. I mean, ironically, the Jewish text that's being read in synagogues around the world, at least for Reform Judaism this week, is from Leviticus chapter 25. And I sometimes tease, I'm sure that's all of your favorite Old Testament passage. How many of you know what it's about? It's the year of Jubilee. It's Jesus' very first sermon, where he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, freedom for the oppressed, recovery of sight for the blind." We're the blind, people. The church are the blind. Might God open our eyes, and might we not be so audacious to think that we have the answers. You know, Romans 12 says, "Do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought." I certainly have been guilty of that, missed 3 master's degrees and 2 doctorates. And how many books? I'm still trying to keep up with Soon-Chan Ra and Lisa Sharon Harper. Might we submit ourselves to God? That passage also talks about doing that which God calls us to do. And the good news is God has called each of us uniquely and differently. We're each in different contexts. The scriptures talk about being obedient to God, not obedient to humankind, right? But we do that within the context of community. And so, might God give us eyes to see. Might God break our hearts for the things that break the heart of God, but expand our hearts so that we have more capacity because of our own limitedness and our own weakness, right? Might we not think of ourselves more highly than we ought, and then might we be obedient to that which God has called us to do. And I promise you, he has equipped you to do it. He has given you what you need. I wake up every day and I don't feel that way. And when you work every day and the situation on the ground gets worse, we have to hold on to the truth that the scripture says, hope is that which you do not yet see. Right? God will be faithful to the Palestinian people. I fundamentally believe that to be true. God will set the oppressed free. I fundamentally believe that to be true. So what role do we play in it? Be obedient to that which God has called you to do. And do the hard work, that soul-searching hard work, that painful work of being really honest of what within us needs to be rooted out. It's much easier to point at the other person, point at the person next to you. Tell them what needs to be rooted out in them. I've had quite a bit of that the last 8 months. Right? Do that hard searching work. And then by the grace of God, he will give us what we need. And the good news of the gospel is this, 2 Thessalonians 3. But the Lord is faithful. He will strengthen you and protect you from the evil one. And we have confidence in the Lord that what you are doing and will continue to do will be according to his command. May the Lord direct our hearts into God's love and into Christ's perseverance. Amen.
Reverend Dr. Jack Serra is the president of Bethlehem Bible College. Born and raised in the old city of Jerusalem, Jack studied at the Bethlehem Bible College after committing his life to Christ and his teachings in 1991. Jack went to the Philippines to study at the Alliance Biblical Seminary, AGS now, where he earned his Master of Divinity degree. Reverend Jack holds a doctorate degree from Gordon Cornwall Theological Seminary in Missions and Cross-Cultural Studies. He began serving at Bethlehem Bible College as the incoming president in 2011 and officially from 2012. He's married to Dr. Madeleine Sara, and they have 3 children, Nathan, Marantha, and Mikel. Reverend Jack Serra travels around the globe teaching about the missions and cross-cultural work in the Middle East. Together, let's all welcome Reverend Dr. Jack Serra.
Well, it's certainly a great honor to have you all with us, be among you, fellowship with you, and have you at our home. So I want to say again, welcome and welcome and welcome. As we started this conference 2 days ago, I was not able to welcome each and every one of you. And if you know me personally, I'm an extrovert, a very extrovert, which means if I am in a room with 100 people, I have to meet each and every one of them. And you could understand now my frustration. So I would love to fellowship with you, have to talk with you, and hopefully most of you will continue to pray for Bethlehem Bible College, which is the mother of this conference, Christ at the Checkpoint, that had been one of our flagships since 2010. Founded by the college, initiated by Reverend Alex Awad, and of course endorsed by the father of the college, Dr. Bishara Awad, that I want you to recognize his presence here. By all means, and not to plug again, but Bethlehem Bible College has been the proof of the Christian witness in context of oppression. And I could talk more and more about it, but I'm sure all of you have already read, saw us, met us, heard us, supported us, prayed for us and with us. And it's our hope that you will continue to do so as you go back to your respective places with challenges, with homework that will bring fruit to God's glory and His kingdom. And as I started reflecting about sharing about this context that we're living in, I wouldn't say you've heard enough, but you've heard from my colleagues, from each speaker who stood up on this pulpit, who sat on these seats, who shared from the pews and around the workshops about the unction, the plight, the heart, the hurts, the frustrations, the sadness, the joys, the hopes of our people, the Palestinians. And this comes out of a community, a small community, that I wouldn't dare to call them minority. Because if you come to any of us Palestinian Christians, although according to any definition, we are a minority in this land, we would never call ourselves a minority. Because we're not just part and parcel of the fabrics of the society, we are here rooted as the olive tree. And although the historic region of Palestine holds place in the faith often referred to as the fifth gospel. You know, it's not far away from here where Saint Jerome that brought us the Bible into the modern languages starting with Latin, translated in a little cave under the Nativity Church where we go to pray sometimes. wrote up the scriptures so that the whole, what's called today the modern world will have it, talked about our country as the fifth gospel. Because wherever you go, wherever you walk, you see some of the stories of scriptures that we have so much affinity to comes alive in our faces. And in this context, it does bring history, presence, reflections on not just the stones of the Holy Land, the sites where tourists, pilgrims, visitors come and visit and see, and they all say, oh, Jesus walked here. But Jesus did not just walk here, he left a legacy. He left a church. He left humans, people who carry his name, Christians. And despite having history and strong Christian community, many are surprised to discover that Palestine had always been, and there always been, a vibrant Christian community living here, rooted deep like the olive tree. The roots of our people, the Palestinians, and I want to go through a little brief of history. I'm not going to take much to talk about every period. But if you count from day one of Christianity, whether it is AD 33 or AD 29 or 28, I'm not going to dispute that because it's not the time to kind of talk, but we know we have a glitch in history. But for over 2,000 years, with consequent empires, rulers, authorities, coming, ruling over the land that we all call the Holy Land. Amidst everything, there has never been a period of time that Christians did not exist. Some might call my own tribe the evangelicals. Yeah, but they were Catholics, Orthodox, nominal, traditional. They were always there as a witness to what happened 2,000 years. And the roots of Palestinian Christians can be traced all the way from the first century. The apostles, disciples, whom when then were local Jews, formed the first Christian communities together with the non-Jews who converted. Yet Jerusalem and its surrounding became central to the spread of Christianity, the gospel, and the significant events such as Pentecost occurred in our country. And you could read Acts chapter 2. By the end of the first century, several Christian communities had been established in key cities, such as Jerusalem, around the Galilee, Jaffa, Caesarea, Nablus, and elsewhere. These communities were among the earliest to adopt and spread the Christian faith and the message of God's kingdom. During the Roman and the Byzantine eras, early Christians in Palestine did face a period of persecution. And despite that, they managed to thrive. And especially after Christianity became legal, after the Edict of Milan, and then you have Christians here all over the place building churches. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Madama map, which is an interesting thing to keep thinking of how Jerusalem was during the 5th and the 6th century, with churches bigger than any other structure in the midst of Jerusalem. And the only thing that happened was 614, when most of the churches were destroyed by the Persians all over the country, to the point that it was so much devastation in 2 years that took hundreds of years to rebuild what was destroyed in less than 2 years. And then we have the Islamic conquest and rule from the 7th century onward, as Christians became like a minority under the Muslim rule. However, many Christians continued to live and practice their faith, contributing to the cultural and intellectual life of the region. And then we had the Treaty of Omar, which, again, I'm not going to go deeper into dissecting and interpreting and kind of like doing parsing of every word was there. But there was a treaty that were given to the Christian by the Muslims, the Khalifa Omar, who came basically to take Jerusalem and rule over Jerusalem together with the new rule. And you could read about it because it's too long to read it all together. But within that treaty, you could read how the Muslims who came here desired to rule over this country and keep its inhabitants, the Christians, in a way, living, practicing their faith in their churches and in their communities. And then after that conquest, we have different dynasties, ruling parties. From the Abbasid Fatimid period, Christians always had varied degrees of tolerance and hardship. And it did fluctuate, to be honest with you. Sometimes it was, they had a great time, they thrived, and sometimes they had hard times. And we know this from history, and we cannot hide our history. And then we have the Crusaders, which is 1,000 years almost after the church was born here. And that era brought some sort of temporary Christian rule to parts of the Palestine, but also significant upheaval. And following the Crusader period, we have the Mamluks and others. And then we saw a change in Jerusalem and elsewhere around this country, where for almost 100 years, this country was Christian again. Again, the name. Were they practicing Christianity? We have to ask that question. However, local Arab Christians under Crusaders experienced a mix of hardship and adaptation. While they faced the Latinization efforts, cultural tensions, and occasional privileges, they also managed to maintain their religious and cultural identities, Eastern Orthodox identities. Still, they remained. And then you have the Mamluk rule. And under the Mamluk as well, they had to struggle to survive, to continue on their resilience, and to remain in their own land. Then we have the Ottomans, which produced and introduced the millet system. Again, I'm zipping through history. You could read all of this. It's easy and straightforward about at least the periods of time that our country had gone through. Then in this rule, which actually was the longest so far, of over 400 years, that changed the face of this country till now. I mean, wherever you go to the walls of Jerusalem, that's Ottoman. Go to a lot of the structures around this country, it's Ottoman. And Palestinian Christians under Ottoman rule experienced a period of some sort of stability because they were given some sort of an autonomy, but it did introduce some sort of fragmentation within the Christian communities. The millet system was introduced, which provided some sort of structure for Christians to maintain their religious and cultural identities. I mean, if you watch, some of you like to watch the parades, when the bishops walk, they want to come to the church and they have an entourage and someone knocking on the ground like this with a stick. That was all introduced during the Ottoman period. And we have an expert on this, soon to be, hopefully soon, Dr. Haytham, who would, if you need to ask about anything related to the history of Bethlehem, Jerusalem, and anything, go to him. He's that authority. After the Ottoman, we have who? The British. Did the Christian leave? No. Did the numbers dwindle? Always. During the British Mandate, Palestinian Christians were a small number comprising approximately of 10% of the population. They lived primarily in cities like Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, as well as smaller towns and villages that some of them till now remain almost primarily Christian till today. The Christian churches in Palestine, including the Greek Orthodox, Latin Catholic, Anglican churches, played roles in supporting Palestinian national aspiration and advocating for the rights of Palestinians in general. So the last century alone, from the onset British control in 1922 until the end of 1947, an estimated 100,000 to 150 Palestinians, comprising only 10th, I would say more or less, had to be displaced and expelled or stripped of their national identities. This is during the British mandate. Unfortunately, there is a concern that this community presence in Palestine, till now, and we will talk more about it, may be at risk of vanishing. Just for the sake of time, I'm sorry I'm going fast a little bit, and I'll reflect on this as I will have a few minutes, and we'll have some time. I hope to have some time for Q&A where we can dig deeper, both me and May, about some of those issues. Under the occupation, it's just the description has been from catastrophe to catastrophes. My grandfather, my father, myself, my son, 4 generations so far. And our life description is always war, always catastrophes. We never had it easy. And at the wake of creation of the State of Israel, almost 50% of the Palestinian Christians became refugees or IDPs, internally displaced peoples. Community fragmentation, Israel, West Bank, Jerusalem, Gaza, and as Israel started to occupy the land bit by bit, each community, each place has been given a certain status or an identity, which our life experience might have varied from location to location, but even those of us who had an easier life still felt threatened and pushed out from place to place. Palestinian Christians, although have seen all of these authorities, imperial powers, have demonstrated always a remarkable resilience since the first century. And I'm saying this because we do talk, and we're now talking about how we are persevering in the midst of such oppressive context just within the past 76 years. But I'm putting things in much larger perspective. It has been 2,000 years. So the 76 years will not crush us. Our enduring presence and faith amidst historical and contemporary challenges highlight our strength and determination. And the word for that is, I didn't hear it. The word for that is sumud. This is our sumud. This is what we coin as sumud. Through strong bonds, deep cultural religious identity, and support from international networks like yourself, we will continue to remain. We will continue to remain. Palestinian Christians today in the West Bank and elsewhere, we don't even make up 1 to 1.5% of all the communities in this land. And as we exist with numbers that are more or less in the West Bank about 1%, in Israel about 1.6%, representing about 14 different denominations. I don't want to mention all of them and talk about it. It's going to take too long. But we have been here. And some of us, it's not that we want to talk, it's who rules. If you're in Israel, you're in Israel. If you're in Palestine, you're in Palestine. And each place has its own difficulty and challenge. And just a little note about evangelicals, because I was also asked, we as an evangelical institution here at Bethlehem Bible College, which is part of the Evangelical Council in Palestine, we have been here for over 150 years. Evangelical missions, Protestant missions started in the early 19th centuries, the Anglicans and the Lutherans and the later on Baptists, later on all sorts of American mission agencies that started sending. My own denomination, the Christian and Missionary Alliance, started in Jerusalem in 1890. But all of us, again, some of us are competing today. Who was first here? Who's the mother church? And who? Honestly, it's a hard question to ask because, whether you ask a Catholic, what were you before? Or as an Anglican, what were you before? Or Lutheran, what were you before? Or an evangelical, we are all Christians. And the Christian identity oversees, it's over everything else within our identities. If you ask a Christian today or a Palestinian Christian today, what are you? Before saying I'm a Palestinian or Israeli or an Arab or Bethlehemite, he would say to you, I am a Christian. And they will not never, sometimes they will not mention the denomination to you, because their Christian identity is the most important identity that we carry. Do you agree with me, Palestinian Christians? About 200,000 in Palestine, Israel, 130,000 in Israel, 40 to 50,000 in the West Bank and Gaza, 14 churches group, but sadly, one description that I cannot hide and we will not hide and we want to protect, so that hopefully either it will remain the same or we'll bring more children, so that we will learn from Shireen what to do. You know, that she has 4 kids. Our numbers will grow. But however, we are still small in numbers. Although our small percentage, yet our contribution is significant. Politically speaking, culturally speaking, literature, social, educational, and also theological. We are part of this product of how Palestinian Christians will not stay on the boundary line. We decided to cross the boundary line and move forward to provide something better for our future. Although our writing, theologies, theologizing, reading scriptures sometimes is quite challenging to some of our friends in the West, yet it comes out from our context of being oppressed for 2,000 years. Some of our writing are reactive, shaped by the conflict, narrative, liberation theology, evangelical, anti-Zionism, contextual theology, pastoral, or even missional, to the point that when they talked about which is the country that did send missionaries most among all the world, guess which country won? Believe it or not, it's Palestine. In a report done by Gordon Conwell Center for Mission Studies, they found out that Palestinian Christians, that's per capita by the way, send the most missionaries to the world. Google it, I'm not kidding. The second is Brazil. First is Palestine. We have our struggles, we're oppressed, we have difficulties, yet we opted to continue on sharing God's love locally and globally. And that's what we do. We have several initiatives. If you're part of one of those organizations, shout out Kairos, Christ at the Checkpoint, Sabil, DR, Holy Land Trust, Kremezan, Tent of Nations, Musalaha, YMCA, WIAM, and many other organizations. And forgive me if you're a Palestinian organization and I did not mention your name. But these initiatives are not brought to us from outside. There's so much indigenous, local, that shares the unctions, the hearts, our aspiration for change in our communities. I want to skip through and not talk more about this because I want to leave for Christians, but I fear, for the Christians in Gaza as well. Because, again, I'm not just singling out the Christians, but because we are supposed to suffer with those who suffer. We suffer with all the Palestinians in Gaza. But if you know anything about Gazan Christian community, we say 800 to 900 remaining, but sadly speaking, I don't know if even 700 are left today. And Yusuf could correct me, and those Christians from Gaza could correct me today. Of the recent number of how many Christians remained in Gaza, with all what they saw so far in Gaza. You know, with the killing, with the bombing, with the snipers that shot elderly lady, Christians like Ilham Farah, who, when I used to visit the Baptist church in Gaza, she would sit on the piano and start playing amazing Christian songs. She was left to die on the streets of Gaza. Like these 2 precious ladies who were killed in the vicinity of the Catholic Church in Gaza. And each one of them will draw a line of how much Christians will remain in this country. So it is an existential threat, by all means. And when I highlight this important issue, I hope that you would understand that it's not that we are only afraid that this country will be deployed, will be emptied from its local Christians, because it does affect and impact the whole Holy Land if there is no Christians here. Michael Sabbah, former Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, said, "We see a continuous slow bleeding of our people. The occupation and the economic and political instability are leading our young people to seek a better future elsewhere." Sami Awad, who I'm happy to see among us, said, "The Christian presence in the land where Christianity was born is being eroded. We are witnessing a modern exodus driven by the lack of hope and opportunities." Reverend Mitter Rahib said, "The Christian presence in the Holy Land is at risk. The land of Christ is becoming a museum of holy places with no living stones to keep the faith alive." I hope not. I hope your presence here will encourage our thriving, remaining sumud in our land. And I'm over time, right? So I will try to, in 1 minute, say how much we are frustrated sometimes as well with many of our fellow Christians in the West and elsewhere. I myself, as an evangelical minister, I'm jealous for our witness in such times like this. I want our message to be clear and compelling and relevant, not only to my own people, the Palestinian, but also to every other nation on this earth. After all, the image we project is how our neighbors will understand Jesus Christ. How can we call ourselves evangelicals if promoting the gospel of the love of Jesus is not our first agenda? How can we be true evangelicals if our motivation is more toward the manipulation of international politics rather than the kingdom of Jesus Christ and his centrality? And we see it. I live in Jerusalem. And the images that we see in Jerusalem from evangelicals, sometimes who come from the West and elsewhere, reflect a different reality. Guess what does it reflect? This is what our people see. And this is only a slight picture of what our people see from Christians. And I ask,